Michael Stevens pushed his industrial cleaning cart down the main hallway of Lincoln Middle School in Seattle's Rainier Valley neighborhood, the wheels squeaking slightly on the freshly mopped linoleum floor. It was 6:45 p.m. on a Tuesday evening in late October, and the building was mostly empty now. Teachers had left by 5 p.m. After-school programs had ended by 6 p.m., and the administrative staff had locked their offices and gone home for the day. This was Michael's favorite time at the school, when the chaotic energy of 8,500 middle school students had dissipated and he could work methodically through his cleaning routine in relative peace and quiet. At 47 years old, Michael had been working as a custodian at Lincoln Middle School for 11 years, taking the job after being laid off from a manufacturing plant that had closed during the 2008 recession. He'd been unemployed for 8 months, watching his savings dwindle and his prospects narrow when the custodial position at the school district had become available. The pay was modest. Michael made approximately $42,000 annually after 11 years of regular raises, but it came with solid benefits including health insurance, a pension, paid time off, and job security that was increasingly rare in the modern economy. Michael's official title was head custodian, which meant he supervised 2 other custodial workers and was responsible for maintaining the entire 85,000 square foot school building. His shift ran from 2 p.m. to 10:30 p.m. on weekdays, arriving as students were finishing their last classes of the day and staying long after everyone else had gone home. His responsibilities included emptying trash cans, sweeping and mopping floors, cleaning bathrooms, disinfecting surfaces, vacuuming carpets in offices and the library, maintaining the cafeteria after meals, performing minor repairs and maintenance, setting up for events, and ensuring the building was secure before locking up for the night. The work was physically demanding. Michael walked several miles through the building every day, lifted heavy trash bags and equipment, climbed ladders to change light bulbs and clean high surfaces, bent and stretched constantly to reach every corner that needed cleaning. His back ached most days by the end of his shift. His knees complained when he climbed stairs. His hands were dry and cracked from constant exposure to cleaning chemicals despite wearing gloves most of the time. But Michael took pride in his work. He believed that a clean, well-maintained school created a better learning environment for students. He noticed when bathrooms were running low on supplies and restocked them before anyone had to ask. He repaired broken desk legs and wobbly chairs so students had proper furniture. He cleaned up spills immediately to prevent accidents. He made sure the building was welcoming and functional, understanding that for many students, school was the safest and most stable environment in their lives. Over 11 years, Michael had become part of the fabric of Lincoln Middle School. Students greeted him in the hallways, asked him about his day, thanked him when they saw him cleaning their classrooms. Teachers appreciated his reliability and his willingness to help with last-minute needs like moving furniture or cleaning up after messy science experiments. Administrators valued his institutional knowledge and his attention to detail. Michael wasn't just the janitor. He was Mr. Stevens, a respected member of the school community who knew students by name and cared about their well-being. It was this familiarity with the rhythms and patterns of the school that made Michael notice when something was off, when a student's behavior suggested they might need help. And over the past 2 months, Michael had been noticing a pattern with one particular student that was increasingly concerning him. As Michael continued his evening cleaning routine, he passed by the school library, which was located near the center of the building, with large windows looking out into the main hallway. The library was supposed to close at 6 p.m. when the library aide finished her shift and locked up for the day. But Michael had noticed that over the past 2 months, there was frequently one student still in the library, well after closing time, a 7th-grade girl with long brown hair who sat at a table in the back corner, always working on homework or reading, always alone. Michael glanced through the library windows and saw her there again tonight. The girl, he'd learned her name was Emma Carter by checking the library sign-in sheet one evening, sat at her usual table with textbooks and notebooks spread in front of her, writing intently. She had an oversized backpack sitting beside her chair, bulging with what appeared to be everything she owned. She wore the same outfit Michael had seen her in several times that week, jeans and a grey hoodie that was slightly too large for her thin frame. This was the 4th evening this week that Emma had been in the library past closing time, and it was a pattern Michael had been observing for approximately 2 months now. Almost every school night, Emma stayed late, sometimes until 7 p.m., sometimes until 8 p.m., always the absolute last student to leave the building. Michael would see her in the library during his cleaning rounds, then see her still there an hour later, then finally see her reluctantly gathering her things and leaving only when Michael mentioned that he needed to lock up the building soon. Michael had initially assumed Emma was simply a dedicated student who preferred studying at school rather than at home, perhaps because she had distracting siblings or needed the quiet environment and resources the library provided. Many students stayed after school for legitimate reasons: homework help, club activities, waiting for working parents to pick them up. It wasn't unusual in itself, but over 2 months of observation, Michael had noticed details about Emma's situation that suggested something more concerning than a student who simply preferred studying at school. She arrived at school very early. Michael often saw her waiting by the front entrance when he arrived for his 2 p.m. shift, suggesting she'd been there since before school started at 7:30 a.m. and had remained through the entire school day into the afternoon. She never had lunch money and always took the free meal provided to students from low-income families. She wore the same limited rotation of clothes week after week, the same 3 or 4 outfits repeated constantly, always slightly wrinkled as if they'd been slept in or pulled from a bag. Most concerning was Emma's backpack. It was enormous, a hiking-style backpack meant for camping trips, and it was always completely full and very heavy. Michael had watched Emma struggle to lift it onto her shoulders, saw how she staggered slightly under its weight. Normal students carried backpacks with textbooks and notebooks, maybe 20 pounds at most. Emma's backpack looked like it weighed 40 or 50 pounds, as if she was carrying everything she owned. Michael had also noticed that Emma looked exhausted all the time. She had dark circles under her eyes, frequently yawned, sometimes dozed off at her library table before jerking awake. Her face was pale and thin, suggesting she wasn't eating enough. Her hair, while clean, was often pulled back in a messy ponytail, as if she'd been in a hurry when styling it, or didn't have access to a mirror. She moved through the school quietly, keeping her head down, not engaging with other students socially, seeming to want to be invisible. All of these observations together painted a picture that worried Michael deeply. He'd worked at Lincoln Middle School for 11 years and had seen many students from difficult circumstances. The school served a diverse, largely working-class neighborhood where many families struggled financially. Michael knew which students were in foster care, which ones had parents in prison, which ones dealt with substance abuse or domestic violence at home, which ones were homeless or housing insecure. He'd learned to recognize the signs: the exhaustion, the limited clothing, the carrying of all possessions, the reluctance to leave school at the end of the day because school was safer and more stable than wherever they were going afterward. Emma showed all the signs of a student experiencing homelessness or severe housing instability. But Michael wasn't sure, and he didn't want to make assumptions or invade her privacy if he was wrong. He'd been wrestling for weeks with whether to say something to administrators or counselors, whether to approach Emma directly, or whether to continue observing and hope that whatever support systems existed for struggling students were already aware of her situation and helping. Michael walked to the library entrance and knocked gently on the doorframe to get Emma's attention. She looked up, startled, then relaxed slightly when she saw it was Mr. Stevens, the friendly custodian she'd seen around the building. "Hi, Emma. It's getting late. I need to start cleaning the library soon and then lock up the building. Are you about ready to head home?" Michael kept his tone gentle and non-threatening, not wanting to alarm her. Emma glanced at the clock on the library wall, 7:15 p.m. She'd been at school for nearly 12 hours. "Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I'll get my stuff." She began slowly gathering her books and notebooks, carefully placing them in her overstuffed backpack, clearly trying to delay leaving as long as possible. "No rush, take your time," Michael said. "I just wanted to give you a heads up. Do you have a ride coming to pick you up?" "I'm walking, I don't live far." Emma avoided eye contact as she said this, and Michael noticed she didn't specify where she was walking to. "It's pretty dark out there now, and it's supposed to rain tonight. Are you sure you don't want to call someone for a ride? You can use the phone in the office." "No, it's fine. I walk every day. I'm used to it." Emma hoisted her massive backpack onto her shoulders, wincing slightly at the weight, and headed toward the library exit. Michael watched her go, his concern deepening. It was late October in Seattle, which meant it was fully dark by 7 p.m., and the temperature was dropping into the low 40s at night. Emma was walking somewhere in the dark and cold, carrying a backpack that looked like it weighed as much as she did, going to a home she wouldn't describe or talk about. Michael returned to his cleaning routine, but his mind kept returning to Emma. He'd seen her pattern for 2 months now, staying at school as long as possible, carrying everything she owned, looking exhausted and underfed, reluctant to leave. Tomorrow, he decided, he would mention his concerns to one of the school counselors. He couldn't ignore this anymore. Something was wrong in Emma's life, and even if he was overstepping or misreading the situation, it was better to check and be wrong than to stay silent and allow a child to suffer unnecessarily. The next morning, Michael arrived at school at his usual 2 p.m. time, but as he was unlocking the custodial office to store his coat and lunch, he heard a noise coming from the girls' bathroom near the main entrance. It was 2:15 p.m. School had ended at 2:45 p.m., so some students would still be in the building, but this bathroom was rarely used at this time of day since it was far from most classrooms. Michael walked toward the bathroom to investigate the noise. As he approached, he heard what sounded like quiet crying. He stopped outside the entrance, not wanting to enter the girls' bathroom but concerned about whoever was inside and distressed. "Hello, is everything okay in there? This is Mr. Stevens, the custodian. I heard crying and wanted to make sure you're all right." The crying stopped abruptly. After a moment, a small voice said, "I'm fine, sorry, I'll leave." Michael recognized the voice. It was Emma. "Emma, it's okay, you don't need to leave. I'm just checking to make sure you're all right. Are you hurt? Do you need me to get a counselor or the nurse?" There was a long silence. Then Michael heard a bathroom stall door unlock and saw Emma emerge, her face red and tear-streaked, her massive backpack on the floor beside her. But what shocked Michael was that Emma looked like she'd just woken up. Her hair was disheveled, her face had creases from sleeping on something, and she was wearing the same clothes from yesterday. "Emma, have you been here all night?" Michael asked gently, though he already knew the answer. Emma's face crumpled and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. She nodded, unable to speak. Michael felt his heart break. This child, this 12-year-old 7th grader, had spent the night sleeping in a school bathroom. She'd been at school for over 24 hours straight, hiding in a bathroom stall after Michael had locked up the building the previous evening, sleeping there because she had nowhere else to go. "Oh, sweetie," Michael said softly. "Come on, let's get you somewhere more comfortable than a bathroom. Have you eaten anything?" Emma shook her head, still crying. "Okay, first thing is we get you some food. Come with me to the cafeteria. School hasn't started yet, so the staff won't be there, but I have keys to everything, and we can find you something to eat." Michael led Emma to the cafeteria, found some packaged breakfast items left over from the morning meal program, and sat with her while she ate. He didn't ask her questions immediately, just let her eat and calm down, trying to create a sense of safety. After Emma had eaten 2 breakfast sandwiches, a banana, and drunk a carton of milk, she seemed slightly less fragile. Michael spoke gently. "Emma, I need to understand what's happening so I can help you. Are you homeless? Is that why you've been staying at school late and sleeping here?" Emma nodded, tears streaming down her face again. "We got evicted from our apartment 2 months ago. My mum lost her job, and we couldn't pay rent. We've been living in our car, but there's not enough room, my mum, my little brother and me, and it's so cold at night, and I can't sleep when we're parked on different streets every night, and I'm scared someone will hurt us, so I've been staying at school as long as I can, and then walking to wherever my mum parked the car that night. But last night, I couldn't. I was so tired. I hid in the bathroom after you locked up, and I slept here because it's warm and I feel safe at school." Michael listened, his chest tight with sorrow and anger at the circumstances that had led to a 12-year-old child sleeping in a bathroom because she had nowhere else to go. Emma Carter was homeless, had been homeless for 2 months, had been trying to hide her situation and cope on her own without asking for help, had been using the school as shelter and refuge because it was the only stable place in her life. "Emma, I'm so sorry you're going through this," Michael said, "but you did nothing wrong, and there are people who can help. I need to tell some adults at school about your situation so we can get your family the help and resources you need. Is that okay?" Emma looked terrified. "Will they take me away from my mum? Will they put me in foster care? Please don't let them separate us. My mum is trying her best. She didn't want this to happen. I don't know exactly what will happen," Michael said honestly, "but I do know that the people at this school care about you and want to help. Our counselors, our principal, they work with families in crisis all the time. The goal is always to keep families together and get them the support they need. Let me talk to Principal Walsh and the counselors, and we'll figure this out together, okay?" Emma nodded reluctantly, wiping her tears with her sleeve. Michael walked Emma to the main office, which was just opening for the day at 6:30 a.m. Administrative staff arrived early to prepare for the school day starting at 7:30 a.m. He explained to the administrative assistant that he needed to speak with Principal Walsh immediately about an urgent student welfare situation. Principal Jennifer Walsh was a woman in her early 50s who'd been an educator for 27 years and principal at Lincoln Middle School for 9 years. She was known for her compassionate leadership and her fierce advocacy for students from disadvantaged backgrounds. When Michael brought Emma into her office and explained what he'd discovered, Emma sleeping in a bathroom, her family living in a car, her 2 months of secretly coping with homelessness while trying to maintain her schoolwork, Principal Walsh's expression was pained but unsurprised. "Thank you for bringing this to me, Michael," Principal Walsh said. "Emma, honey, I'm so glad you're safe and that Mr. Stevens found you. You've been carrying such a heavy burden by yourself. We're going to help you and your family. I promise you, our goal is to keep your family together and get you the housing and support you need." Principal Walsh immediately called the school's social worker, Karen Rodriguez, and the guidance counselor who worked with 7th grade students, David Chen. Within 30 minutes, they'd assembled in Principal Walsh's office with Emma to assess the situation and develop an immediate response plan. Karen Rodriguez, the school social worker, had extensive experience working with homeless and housing insecure students. She explained to Emma that Lincoln Middle School had resources specifically for students experiencing homelessness, as required by the federal McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. This law required schools to identify homeless students and ensure they had access to education and support services. "Emma, under the McKinney-Vento Act, you have certain rights," Karen explained. "You have the right to stay enrolled at this school even though you don't have a permanent residence. You have the right to transportation to and from school if you're staying somewhere far away. You have the right to free meals. And most importantly, the school has a responsibility to connect your family with services that can help you find stable housing." Karen asked Emma for her mother's contact information so she could reach out immediately. Emma provided her mother's cell phone number, and Karen called explaining who she was and that Emma was safe at school and they needed to meet to discuss support services for the family. Emma's mother, Lisa Carter, arrived at the school within an hour, looking exhausted, stressed and deeply ashamed. She was a woman in her late 30s who'd clearly been struggling to hold her family together through impossible circumstances. Karen, Principal Walsh and the counselor met with Lisa while Emma waited in another room with Michael, who'd stayed with her throughout the morning to provide support and reassurance. Lisa explained her family's situation. She'd been working as a medical assistant at a clinic but had been laid off 8 months ago when the clinic downsized. She'd struggled to find another job that paid enough to cover rent in Seattle's expensive housing market. She'd fallen behind on rent, and despite trying to negotiate with her landlord and seeking assistance from various agencies, she'd eventually been evicted. With no savings, bad credit, and no family in the area to stay with, Lisa and her 2 children, Emma, 12, and her son Jacob, 7, had been living in their 2008 Honda Accord for 2 months. Lisa had been parking in different locations every night to avoid being told to move by police or security guards. She'd been feeding her children as best she could with the limited money she had from odd jobs and occasional day labor. She'd been trying desperately to find work, to save enough for a deposit on an apartment, to get her family back into stable housing. But the barriers were overwhelming. She needed money for a deposit and first month's rent, but she couldn't save money while spending everything on food and gas. She needed a job, but potential employers were reluctant to hire someone with no permanent address. She needed childcare for her 7-year-old son, but couldn't afford it without a job. "I've been trying so hard," Lisa said, crying. "I never wanted my kids to go through this. Emma has been so brave, never complaining, trying to keep going to school and do her homework like everything is normal. But I know it's not normal. I know they're suffering. I just don't know how to fix it." Karen Rodriguez listened with compassion, taking notes on the family's situation and needs. "Lisa, you're not alone in this. There are resources available, and we're going to connect you with all of them. First, we need to get your family into emergency shelter tonight. I'm going to contact Mary's Place, which provides shelter specifically for families experiencing homelessness. They have space available and can take you and your children tonight." Lisa looked overwhelmed with relief at the prospect of not spending another night in the car. Karen continued explaining the support services available. She would connect Lisa with housing case managers who could help her navigate the process of finding and securing affordable housing. She would connect her with TANF, temporary assistance for needy families, to provide cash assistance while she looked for work. She would help her apply for SNAP benefits for food assistance. She would connect her with job training and placement programs. She would help enroll Jacob in the school district's early learning program, which provided care while Lisa worked or searched for work. "Getting out of homelessness is complicated and takes time," Karen said. "But there's a path forward, and there are people who will help you navigate it."
Our job at the school is to make sure Emma and Jacob have stability and support while you're working on housing. Emma will continue attending school here. We'll provide breakfast and lunch. We'll make sure she has school supplies. We'll give her a locker where she can keep things safely so she doesn't have to carry everything in her backpack. And we'll check in with her regularly to make sure she's okay emotionally. Principal Walsh added, Lisa, I want you to know that this situation doesn't reflect on your worth as a parent. You've been dealt an incredibly difficult hand. Job loss, eviction, homelessness. Those are systemic problems, not personal failures. What matters is that you're accepting help now and working to get your family into stable housing. We'll support you through this process. Over the next several hours, Karen Rodriguez worked with impressive efficiency to coordinate immediate support for the Carter family. She contacted Mary's Place, a Seattle non-profit that operated emergency shelters for homeless families, and secured beds for Lisa, Emma, and Jacob that night. She contacted the county's Department of Social and Health Services to schedule an appointment for Lisa to apply for emergency assistance programs. She connected Lisa with a housing case manager from DSC, Downtown Emergency Service Center, who would help her navigate the process of finding and affording permanent housing. She arranged for a social services coordinator to meet with Lisa at the shelter that evening to begin developing a comprehensive support plan. Emma returned to class that afternoon after having breakfast, showering in the locker room, and being given a fresh set of clothes from the school's emergency supply closet that maintained clothing donations for students in need. She carried a regular school backpack now, instead of the enormous hiking backpack. Her possessions were secured in a locker, and she no longer needed to carry everything she owned everywhere she went. She looked exhausted, but less burdened, as if the weight of secretly managing homelessness alone had been lifted somewhat by finally having adults aware of her situation and actively helping. Michael checked on Emma several times throughout the rest of the day, making sure she was okay, providing reassurance that she'd done nothing wrong and that help was coming for her family. He felt profound sadness that Emma had been suffering in silence for 2 months, sleeping in a bathroom, trying to cope with homelessness while maintaining perfect attendance and decent grades, all while being just 12 years old. But he also felt grateful that he'd been observant enough to notice her pattern, that he'd been in the bathroom that morning when she needed help, that the school had resources and staff capable of responding effectively to her crisis. That evening, Lisa Carter and her 2 children moved into Mary's Place emergency shelter in South Seattle. For the first time in 2 months, they slept in real beds, in a heated building, with access to bathrooms and showers, with food provided with safety and stability. It was temporary. Emergency shelters only allowed families to stay for 90 days while they worked on finding permanent housing, but it was infinitely better than a car. Over the following weeks and months, the coordinated support services that Karen Rodriguez had connected the Carter family with began helping them rebuild toward stability. Lisa enrolled in a job training program for medical assistants that refreshed her skills and connected her with employers looking to hire. The program also provided childcare for Jacob during training hours. After 6 weeks, Lisa secured a position at a hospital in Seattle, earning slightly more than her previous job had paid. With steady employment and pay stubs to prove her income, Lisa was able to work with her housing case manager to apply for subsidized housing through the Seattle Housing Authority. After 3 months on a waiting list, the family was offered a 2-bedroom apartment in a housing complex where rent was calculated based on income. Lisa's portion of rent was approximately 30% of her earnings, which was affordable on her salary and left enough for food, transportation, and other necessities. 5 months after Michael found Emma sleeping in the school bathroom, the Carter family moved into their new apartment. It was modest, 2 small bedrooms, a combined living room and kitchen, 1 bathroom, older appliances, but it was stable, permanent housing with a lease in Lisa's name. Emma finally had her own bed again, a desk where she could do homework, stability that allowed her to sleep without fear, and the knowledge that she wouldn't have to carry everything she owned in a backpack anymore. Throughout this process, the school continued providing support. Emma received regular check-ins from the guidance counselor to process the trauma of experiencing homelessness and to develop coping strategies. She joined a support group for students from difficult family circumstances, where she could talk about her experiences with peers who understood. The school provided Emma with a mentor, a retired teacher who volunteered with at-risk students, who met with her weekly to provide academic support and positive adult connection. Emma's grades, which had remarkably stayed mostly B's and C's, even during the worst of her housing crisis, improved to A's and B's once she had stable housing and could sleep properly and eat regularly. Her attendance remained perfect. She'd missed 0 days even while homeless, determined not to let her circumstances derail her education. Her teachers noticed she seemed lighter, less burdened, more willing to participate in class and interact with peers socially. Michael continued working as head custodian at Lincoln Middle School, maintaining his evening routine of cleaning the building after students and staff had gone home. But his awareness of students who might be struggling had intensified. He paid closer attention now to kids who stayed late, who wore the same clothes repeatedly, who carried overstuffed backpacks, who looked exhausted or underfed, who seemed reluctant to leave school at the end of the day. He'd learned that his observations mattered, that noticing patterns of behavior could reveal when a student needed help, and that reporting concerns to appropriate staff could literally save lives. He also developed a relationship with Emma, who would stop to chat with Mr. Stevens when she saw him in the hallways, thanking him regularly for helping her family. "You saved us," Emma told him one afternoon, several months after moving into the new apartment. "I was so scared and I didn't know what to do. I thought if I told anyone they'd take me away from my mum. But you helped me tell people, and they didn't take me away. They helped us instead. You changed our lives, Mr. Stevens." Michael felt emotion tighten his chest. "You're the one who was so brave, Emma. You kept going to school, kept doing your homework, kept trying even when everything was so hard. That took incredible strength. I just noticed you needed help, and made sure the right people knew. The counselors and social workers did all the real work."
But if you hadn't noticed, if you hadn't been there that morning, I would have just kept hiding, Emma said. I might still be sleeping in bathrooms instead of in my own bed. Michael thought about that often, how close Emma had come to continuing to suffer in silence, how many nights she might have spent sleeping in school bathrooms or in the car if he hadn't happened to hear her crying that morning. The timing had been fortunate, but the outcome had depended on Michael's willingness to investigate the noise, to talk to Emma compassionately, to immediately connect her with people who could help. The case also highlighted how many students were silently struggling with circumstances beyond their control. Principal Walsh shared with staff at a meeting that Lincoln Middle School currently had 43 students identified as homeless or housing insecure under the McKinney-Vento Act. That was nearly 5% of the student body experiencing some form of homelessness, living in cars, motels, shelters, campgrounds, doubled up with friends or relatives, or in other temporary and unstable situations. These students are in every classroom, but they're often invisible because they're ashamed and trying to hide their circumstances, Principal Walsh said. Emma Carter is an example. She was homeless for 2 months and none of her teachers knew. She never missed a day of school, turned in her homework, participated in class. She was suffering silently. We need to be more observant, look for signs like Emma showed: limited clothing, exhaustion, carrying all possessions, reluctance to leave school. If you notice these patterns, report them to counselors or social workers. We can't help students if we don't know they need help. The staff meeting led to implementation of new protocols at Lincoln Middle School for identifying and supporting homeless students. Teachers received training on recognizing signs of homelessness and housing instability. The school created a discreet supply closet stocked with clothing, hygiene products, school supplies and snack foods that could be provided to students in need without drawing attention. The library extended its hours and allowed students to remain until 7 p.m. with staff supervision, providing a warm, safe space for students who had nowhere else to go after school. The social work department expanded its capacity to conduct home visits and welfare checks for students showing signs of distress. Michael was asked to present at a school district meeting about his experience, noticing Emma's situation and how custodial and support staff could play important roles in identifying struggling students. He explained to the audience of custodians, cafeteria workers, bus drivers and other support staff from schools across Seattle that they were often better positioned than teachers or administrators to notice certain warning signs. Teachers see students for 50 minutes in a classroom setting, Michael explained, but custodians see the whole building. We see who arrives early and leaves late. We see who's sleeping in corners or hiding in bathrooms. We see who's eating food from trash cans or sneaking into the cafeteria after hours. We see patterns that others might miss because we're moving through the entire building all day long. Michael encouraged support staff to trust their observations and report concerns, rather than assuming someone else had already noticed or that it wasn't their place to get involved. Emma Carter was sleeping in a bathroom and I found her by chance because I heard crying and investigated, but I'd been noticing concerning patterns about her for 2 months before that, staying late every day, wearing the same clothes, carrying an overstuffed backpack, looking exhausted. I should have reported those observations sooner. If I had, we might have helped her family avoid some of those 2 months of homelessness. Don't wait like I did. If you notice concerning patterns, report them immediately. The presentation resonated with support staff across the district, many of whom shared their own stories of noticing students in distress, kids stealing food from cafeterias because they were hungry, students sleeping in libraries or locker rooms, kids with bruises or injuries suggesting abuse, students who seemed anxious or frightened around certain adults. The discussion led to district-wide training for all support staff on recognizing and reporting signs of abuse, neglect, homelessness, and other welfare concerns. Over the next several years, this enhanced awareness and reporting led to identification of dozens of students across Seattle schools who were experiencing homelessness, abuse, or neglect. Each identification triggered the school's support systems, social workers, counselors, connections to community resources, collaboration with child protective services when appropriate. While the interventions couldn't solve all the systemic problems causing child homelessness and poverty, they did ensure that individual students and families received help and that suffering didn't continue in silence. The broader issue of child and family homelessness that Emma's case highlighted remained a significant challenge in Seattle and across the country. Rising housing costs, stagnant wages, lack of affordable housing, and insufficient social safety nets meant that families could fall into homelessness through circumstances like job loss, medical emergencies, or domestic violence and then struggle to escape. School-age children experiencing homelessness faced numerous obstacles to success: lack of stable sleep, inadequate nutrition, chronic stress, frequent school changes, limited resources for homework and learning. Organizations like Mary's Place, where the Carter family had found emergency shelter, worked to provide immediate housing and support services for homeless families. But demand far exceeded capacity. Mary's Place and similar organizations had to turn away families regularly because shelters were full. Permanent affordable housing was scarce, with years-long waiting lists for subsidized units. Many families spent months or even years moving between emergency shelters, transitional housing programs, and precarious temporary arrangements before securing permanent housing. The McKinney-Vento Act, which required schools to identify and support homeless students, was an important protection but couldn't address the root causes of family homelessness. Schools could ensure homeless students remained enrolled and received free meals and school supplies, but they couldn't provide their families with housing, living wage jobs, affordable childcare, or the other resources needed to achieve stability. The law created a safety net that prevented complete educational collapse for homeless students, but it was a limited response to a complex systemic problem. Advocates for homeless families emphasized that child homelessness was preventable through policy choices, increasing the minimum wage, expanding affordable housing, strengthening rental assistance programs, providing universal childcare, improving unemployment benefits, and creating more robust economic safety nets to catch families before they fell into homelessness. But these systemic solutions required political will and public resources that were often lacking, particularly in expensive cities like Seattle, where housing costs had skyrocketed faster than wages for working-class families. Emma Carter's case became a touchstone for these broader discussions at Lincoln Middle School and in the Seattle School District. Administrators and advocates used her story carefully, with the family's permission and with Emma's identity protected in public discussions, to illustrate how homelessness affected students and to argue for increased resources for schools serving high-poverty populations. Principal Walsh testified before the Seattle School Board about the need for additional social workers, counselors, and support staff at schools with high percentages of homeless students. We currently have 43 identified homeless students at Lincoln Middle School, and that number is certainly undercounted because many students hide their circumstances like Emma did. Walsh told the board, "We have one full-time social worker to serve 850 students. That ratio is inadequate. Walsh, we need more staff who can identify struggling students, connect families with resources, and provide the intensive support needed to help homeless students succeed academically while their families work toward housing stability." The school board approved funding for an additional social worker position at Lincoln Middle School and at several other schools serving neighborhoods with high poverty rates. The decision was a small step toward addressing the need, though advocates argued much more was necessary to truly serve the growing number of students experiencing homelessness across the district. Emma continued her education at Lincoln Middle School through 8th grade, thriving academically and personally with the stability of permanent housing. She maintained a 3.8 GPA, participated in the school's drama club and student government, and developed close friendships with peers. The trauma of homelessness hadn't disappeared. She still experienced anxiety about her family's financial stability, still had nightmares about living in the car, still felt shame about what she'd experienced, but counseling and support helped her process these feelings and develop healthy coping strategies. When Emma graduated from 8th grade and prepared to transition to high school, she wrote a letter to Michael Stevens, thanking him for changing her family's life. The letter, which Michael kept in his desk and reread whenever he needed reminding of why his work mattered, said, "Dear Mr. Stevens, I'm graduating from Lincoln Middle School, and I wanted to write to thank you before I move on to high school. 2 years ago, you found me sleeping in a bathroom because I had nowhere else to go. I was so scared and ashamed. I thought my life would always be that way, that I'd never have a home again, that I'd have to hide and struggle forever. But you saw me. You helped me. You made sure the right people knew what was happening to my family. Because of you, we got into a shelter. My mum got help finding a job, and we got an apartment. I have my own room now. I have a bed and a desk and stability. I can sleep at night without being afraid. I don't have to carry everything I own in a backpack anymore. I can focus on school and friends and normal teenage things instead of just surviving. You saved my family, Mr. Stevens. You didn't have to pay attention to one random student staying late at school. You didn't have to investigate when you heard crying in a bathroom. You didn't have to care, but you did all those things, and it changed everything for us. I'm going to high school now with good grades and hope for the future. I'm going to graduate and go to college and make something of my life, and it's because you noticed me when I was invisible and helped me when I couldn't help myself. Thank you for everything. I'll never forget what you did for me. Love, Emma Carter." Michael cried when he read the letter. He'd never thought of himself as someone who saved lives or changed destinies. He was a custodian, someone who cleaned buildings and emptied trash cans and mopped floors. But Emma's letter made him understand that his work was about more than cleaning. It was about being present in students' lives, noticing when they struggled, and caring enough to act when he saw someone in need. Michael continued working at Lincoln Middle School for another 7 years after Emma's graduation, eventually retiring at age 54 after 18 years of service. During those final 7 years, he remained vigilant about noticing students who might be struggling with homelessness or other hardships. He identified 3 additional students who were sleeping in the building or showing signs of housing instability and connected them with counselors and social workers who helped their families access support services. Each time Michael noticed a struggling student and reported it, he thought about Emma, how close she'd come to continuing to suffer in silence, how her life had changed once adults became aware of her situation and mobilized resources to help. He thought about the responsibility he had as someone who was in the building for hours after everyone else left, who saw the whole school in ways teachers and administrators didn't, who was positioned to notice when something was wrong. On Michael's last day of work before retirement, the school held a small celebration in his honor. Principal Walsh, who was also preparing to retire after 9 years leading Lincoln Middle School, spoke about Michael's contributions to the school community over 18 years. "Michael Stevens has been far more than a custodian at this school," Walsh said to the assembled staff and students. "He's been a guardian, an advocate, a protector of our most vulnerable students. 18 years ago, he took a job cleaning our building. But over those 18 years, he's saved students' lives by noticing when they were in crisis and making sure they got help. He's maintained this building so beautifully that it's a welcoming, safe space for learning. He's connected with students, learned their names, shown them that every adult in this building cares about their well-being. Michael, you've exemplified what it means to serve students. Your legacy will continue long after you've retired." Emma Carter, now 19 years old and a freshman at the University of Washington, had been invited to attend Michael's retirement celebration. She stood to speak, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "I'm here today because Mr. Stevens saved my life 7 years ago," Emma said. "I was 12 years old, homeless, sleeping in a school bathroom, trying to hide my circumstances because I was ashamed. Mr. Stevens noticed me. He found me when I'd given up hope. He connected me with people who helped my family find housing and stability. Because of him, I graduated middle school with honors, then high school with a 3.9 GPA, and now I'm studying social work at UW because I want to help kids like I was, kids who are struggling and need someone to notice them. Mr. Stevens taught me that paying attention matters, that caring about people matters, that one person noticing someone in need and acting on that concern can change lives. Thank you, Mr. Stevens, for seeing me when I felt invisible. Thank you for caring when you didn't have to. Thank you for saving my family. I'm in college now because you noticed a pattern and reported it. I have a future because you took the time to investigate crying in a bathroom. Everything good in my life traces back to that morning when you found me. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to help other kids the way you helped me." Michael embraced Emma, both of them crying. The room erupted in applause. Other students and staff who'd been impacted by Michael's vigilance and compassion over 18 years shared their own stories. Students he'd noticed struggling and connected with help, teachers he'd supported through difficult times, parents who'd appreciated his kindness and attention to their children. The celebration reinforced what Michael had learned over nearly 2 decades working at Lincoln Middle School, that every job had dignity and importance, that custodians and support staff were essential members of school communities, that observation and caring were powerful tools for protecting vulnerable people, and that ordinary workers doing ordinary work could have extraordinary impacts on individual lives. After retiring, Michael remained involved in education advocacy, serving on a community task force focused on addressing student homelessness in Seattle schools. He shared his experience and insights about how schools could better identify and support homeless students, how support staff could be trained and empowered to notice and report concerning patterns, and how community partnerships with service organizations could create more comprehensive support systems for families in crisis. He also volunteered as a mentor for at-risk students through a non-profit program that connected caring adults with young people who needed positive role models and support. Michael met weekly with a teenage boy who was in foster care and struggling academically, providing the same kind of attention and caring that he'd given students during his years at Lincoln Middle School. "I spent 18 years cleaning a school building," Michael told volunteers at a mentor training session. "But the most important work I did wasn't mopping floors or emptying trash cans. It was noticing students who needed help and making sure they got it. Emma Carter was homeless and sleeping in my building, and I noticed her pattern of behavior and helped connect her family with services that changed their lives. That's the work that mattered most. Not because I was special or heroic, but because I was paying attention and I cared enough to act." That's what mentoring is too, paying attention to a young person, noticing when they're struggling, and caring enough to help. You don't need special credentials or expertise, you just need to be present, observant, and willing to care. 10 years after Michael found Emma sleeping in the school bathroom, she completed her undergraduate degree in social work at the University of Washington and began a master's program specializing in child welfare and family services. Her career goal was to work with homeless families, helping them navigate the complex systems of shelters, housing assistance and support services, doing for other families what social workers had done for her family when they'd been living in their car. Emma's academic work focused on understanding the causes and impacts of child homelessness. She researched how housing instability affected students' academic performance, mental health, and long-term outcomes. She studied effective interventions and policies that could prevent family homelessness or help families exit homelessness quickly. She interviewed dozens of formerly homeless youth about their experiences and what supports had helped them most. Emma's master's thesis, titled Hidden in Plain Sight, School-Based Identification and Support of Homeless Students, used her own experience as a case study to examine how schools could better identify students experiencing homelessness and connect them with appropriate resources. She analyzed the specific behaviors and patterns that had indicated her homelessness: staying at school excessively long hours, carrying all possessions, wearing limited clothing, appearing exhausted and malnourished, and discussed how training school staff to recognize these signs could lead to earlier identification and intervention. "I was homeless for 2 months before anyone at my school knew," Emma wrote in her thesis. "During those 2 months, I attended school every day, interacted with teachers and staff constantly, and displayed multiple warning signs that something was wrong, but no one noticed or questioned my situation until the school custodian found me sleeping in a bathroom. Earlier identification could have meant my family received support sooner, preventing some of the trauma and hardship we experienced." Schools must train all staff, not just teachers and counselors, but also custodians, cafeteria workers, bus drivers, secretaries, to recognize signs of homelessness and know how to report concerns appropriately. Emma's thesis research included interviews with Michael Stevens about his observations of her behavior before finding her in the bathroom and what had made him suspicious that something was wrong. Michael explained that it was the accumulation of small details over time, the pattern of staying late every day, the oversized backpack, the limited clothing, the exhaustion, the reluctance to discuss home life, that had created a picture suggesting homelessness or severe instability. No single observation was definitive, Michael told Emma during the interview. "Lots of students stay after school for legitimate reasons. Lots of students wear the same clothes frequently. But when you see multiple warning signs occurring together consistently over weeks, that's a pattern worth noticing and reporting. I wish I'd reported my concerns sooner, instead of waiting until I found you sleeping in the bathroom. Earlier intervention might have helped your family more quickly." Emma incorporated Michael's insights into recommendations in her thesis about training school staff to recognize cumulative patterns rather than waiting for crisis moments. She argued that schools should implement systematic approaches to identifying at-risk students, regular screenings, attention to attendance and behavior patterns, coordination among all staff about concerning observations, low-barrier referral processes that made it easy for any employee to report concerns about student welfare. The thesis was well received in academic and social work circles, earning recognition from the National Association of Social Workers and being published in an academic journal focused on child welfare. Emma was invited to present her research at conferences, where she shared her personal story and her professional analysis of how schools and social service systems could better serve homeless students and families. Emma's career after completing her master's degree focused on exactly the kind of work she'd envisioned. She became a housing case manager for a non-profit organization serving homeless families in King County, Washington. Her job involved working with families who were in emergency shelters or living in cars, motels, or other unstable situations, helping them navigate the process of finding and securing permanent affordable housing. The work was challenging and often heartbreaking. Emma worked with families facing enormous barriers: poverty, unemployment, disability, domestic violence, substance abuse, criminal records, poor credit, language barriers, lack of documentation. Many families needed not just housing, but also comprehensive support, including job training, childcare, mental health services, legal assistance, and financial counseling. The systems were complex and bureaucratic, with long waiting lists, strict eligibility requirements, and insufficient resources to meet the need, but Emma was exceptionally effective in her role because she understood intimately what her clients were experiencing. She'd lived in a car with her mother and brother. She'd hidden her homelessness from peers because of shame. She'd struggled to focus on schoolwork while dealing with hunger, exhaustion, and fear. She'd felt the despair of not knowing where she'd sleep or whether her family would ever have stability again. This lived experience gave Emma credibility with clients and deep empathy for their struggles. "I know how hard this is," Emma would tell families she worked with. "I know you feel ashamed and hopeless, and like you'll never get out of this situation. I felt all those things when my family was homeless. But I want you to know that getting out of homelessness is possible. My family did it with help from social workers and housing programs. I'm here to provide you with that same kind of help. We'll work together to find you housing, connect you with resources, and support you through this process. You're not alone." Over 5 years working as a housing case manager, Emma helped more than 200 families exit homelessness and move into stable housing. Each family represented individual people: children who could now sleep in beds instead of cars, parents who could work without worrying constantly about where their family would sleep that night, students who could focus on school instead of survival. Emma kept photos and thank you notes from many of the families she'd helped, reminders of why her work mattered even on difficult days when progress felt impossibly slow. 15 years after Michael found Emma in the school bathroom, he attended an event at which Emma was receiving an award from the Washington State Coalition Against Homelessness for her work serving homeless families. Emma was now 32 years old, an experienced social worker and housing advocate, someone who transformed her own experience of homelessness into a career dedicated to helping others. During her acceptance speech, Emma spoke about how her life had changed because one custodian had noticed she needed help. 15 years ago, I was a 12-year-old girl sleeping in a school bathroom because my family had been evicted and we had nowhere to live. I was trying to hide my circumstances, too ashamed to ask for help, convinced that if anyone found out I was homeless, they'd take me away from my family. But the school custodian, Michael Stevens, noticed patterns in my behavior that suggested something was wrong. He found me one morning and helped connect my family with services that changed our lives. We got into emergency shelter, then into permanent housing. My mum got help finding stable employment. I got counseling and support that helped me process the trauma of homelessness. I was able to finish middle school, high school, and college. I became a social worker, specializing in helping homeless families. Emma looked out at the audience and found Michael's face. "Mr. Stevens is here tonight, and I want him to know that every family I've helped over the past 5 years, more than 200 families, is part of his legacy. He noticed me when I was invisible. He cared when he didn't have to. He acted when he could have looked away. Because of him, I not only survived homelessness, but went on to dedicate my career to helping others survive it too. The ripple effects of one person paying attention and helping one struggling child have spread to hundreds of other people. That's the power of caring. That's the impact of noticing someone in need and acting. Thank you, Mr. Stevens, for everything you did for me, and for all the people I've been able to help because you gave me a chance at a future." The audience applauded as Michael stood, tears streaming down his face, and Emma walked over to embrace him. It was a moment of recognition that small acts of observation and caring could create enormous impacts over time.
that one custodian noticing one student had generated ripples that touched hundreds of lives across 15 years. The ceremony included video testimonials from several families Emma had helped exit homelessness, describing how her advocacy and support had changed their circumstances. A mother who'd been living in a domestic violence shelter with her 3 children talked about how Emma had helped her find safe, affordable housing and secure a protective order against her abuser. A father who'd been living in his truck after losing his job talked about how Emma had connected him with job training and employment services and helped him qualify for a subsidized apartment. A teenager who'd been homeless with her mother talked about how Emma had ensured she could stay enrolled in school and had helped her family access support services. Each testimonial reinforced the theme that addressing homelessness required more than just housing. It required comprehensive support, advocacy, connection to resources, and human caring. Emma provided all of those things to the families she worked with, and her effectiveness stemmed directly from her own experience of receiving similar support when her family had been homeless. The event concluded with Emma announcing the launch of a new initiative she was spearheading, a training program for school staff on identifying and supporting homeless students, based on her master's thesis research and her personal experience. The program would be offered free to schools across Washington state and would train teachers, counselors, administrators and support staff to recognize signs of student homelessness and connect students with appropriate resources. Too many students are experiencing homelessness in silence, hiding their circumstances because of shame or fear, Emma explained. I was one of those students. I hid my homelessness for 2 months before someone noticed and helped. But what if school staff had been trained to recognize the warning signs earlier? What if teachers had known to watch for students staying excessively late, wearing limited clothing, appearing exhausted and malnourished? Earlier identification could mean earlier intervention, less trauma, better outcomes. This training program will teach school staff what to look for and how to help. It's named the Michael Stevens Training Program, in honor of the custodian who noticed me and changed my life. Michael was overwhelmed by the honor of having the training program named after him. He'd never sought recognition for helping Emma. He'd simply done what he thought was right. But he understood that his story, combined with Emma's expertise and lived experience, could help educate school staff across the state about the importance of noticing struggling students and taking action to help them.
Over the next several years, the Michael Stevens Training Program trained more than 10,000 school staff members across Washington state in recognizing and responding to student homelessness. The training used Emma's story as a detailed case study, walking participants through the warning signs she'd displayed, explaining why she'd hidden her circumstances, describing the intervention that occurred when Michael found her, and outlining the support services that had helped her family exit homelessness. The training also provided practical guidance on how to approach students compassionately when homelessness was suspected, how to connect families with emergency shelter and housing assistance, what legal protections homeless students had under the McKinney-Vento Act, and how schools could create supportive environments for students dealing with housing instability. Evaluation of the training program showed significant impacts. Schools whose staff completed the training identified 40% more homeless students than schools without the training, suggesting that increased awareness helped staff recognize signs they might previously have missed. Students identified as homeless through staff observations received earlier access to support services, reducing the average duration of homelessness by approximately 3 weeks. Teachers and support staff reported increased confidence in their ability to help struggling students after completing the training. The program expanded beyond Washington state as other states learned about its effectiveness. Emma was invited to adapt the training for use in Oregon, California, and eventually nationwide. She partnered with the National Center for Homeless Education to create a standardized version that could be implemented in any state, adjusted for local resources and policies, but maintaining the core content about recognizing student homelessness and connecting families with support. 20 years after Michael found Emma sleeping in the school bathroom, the impact of that moment continued expanding. Emma was now 37 years old, a recognized expert on family homelessness, the director of family services at a major social service organization in Seattle, and a frequently invited speaker at conferences on poverty, housing, and education. She'd helped more than 500 families exit homelessness during her career. She'd trained more than 50,000 school staff members across the country through the Michael Stevens Training Program. She'd advocated successfully for policy changes that increased funding for homeless services and expanded affordable housing in Washington state. Michael was now 71 years old, retired for 13 years from his custodial work, but still actively involved in education advocacy and mentoring programs. He'd maintained close contact with Emma over 2 decades, watching with pride as she transformed her experience of childhood homelessness into a career helping others. He'd participated in the training program she'd created, sharing his perspective on how custodians and support staff could notice struggling students and the importance of paying attention to patterns of behavior. They met regularly for coffee, maintaining the bond that had formed that morning in the school bathroom when Emma had been 12 years old and desperate, and Michael had been the adult who'd noticed and helped. Their conversations often focused on how to address the growing problem of family homelessness, which remains significant despite increased awareness and resources. "We've made progress," Emma said during one of these coffee meetings. "Schools are better at identifying homeless students now. There are more resources available for families in crisis. The stigma has decreased somewhat, but we still have approximately 2.5 million children experiencing homelessness annually in the United States. That's unconscionable in the wealthiest nation on earth. We need systemic solutions, affordable housing, living wages, stronger safety nets, universal childcare, healthcare access. Without addressing the root causes, we're just managing the symptoms." Michael nodded. "You're doing important work managing those symptoms, though. Every family you help into housing is a family that's not suffering, not sleeping in cars, not struggling to survive. That matters enormously to those specific people, even if it doesn't solve the bigger problem. Both things are necessary, the direct service helping individual families and the advocacy for systemic change." "I know you're right," Emma said, "and I do feel good about the families I've helped. But sometimes I get frustrated that after 20 years of working on this issue, there are still kids sleeping in school bathrooms, still families living in cars, still children experiencing the same trauma I experienced. I wish we were further along in solving this." "Look at how far you've personally come," Michael reminded her. 20 years ago, you were a child sleeping in a bathroom because you had nowhere to live. Now you're a leader in the field, helping hundreds of families, training thousands of school staff, advocating for policy changes. That's remarkable progress, and you've inspired others to do similar work. I've met social workers and educators who entered the field specifically because they heard your story and wanted to help homeless kids like you were. Your impact extends far beyond the families you work with directly." Emma smiled, grateful for Michael's perspective and encouragement. "And it all started because you noticed me, because you paid attention to a student who was trying to be invisible, because you cared enough to investigate crying in a bathroom. That decision you made 20 years ago is still creating ripples. Every family I help, every staff member I train, every policy change I advocate for, it all traces back to you helping me." "We helped each other," Michael said. "You showed me that the work I did as a custodian mattered beyond just keeping the building clean. You taught me that observation and caring could save lives. You gave meaning to my career by letting me be part of your story. I'm grateful for that." They sat together in comfortable silence, two people whose lives had intersected at a crucial moment and had remained connected across 2 decades, both dedicated to ensuring that other children wouldn't have to suffer the way Emma had suffered, both believing that paying attention to people in need and acting on that concern could change the world one person at a time. Emma eventually left Seattle to take a position as the director of a national organization focused on ending family homelessness, overseeing programs across 15 states and advocating at the federal level for increased funding and better policies. Michael remained in Seattle, continuing his volunteer work with at-risk youth and occasionally participating in Emma's training programs as a guest speaker. But they maintained their connection, talking regularly by phone, meeting whenever Emma returned to Seattle, continuing to reflect on how one moment of observation and caring had branched into thousands of impacts over 20 years. Michael had noticed a pattern of behavior suggesting a student needed help. He'd investigated, asked questions, connected Emma with support services. That simple sequence of actions had saved Emma's family from homelessness, enabled Emma to complete her education, inspired her career helping others, led to training programs that helped tens of thousands of school staff better identify struggling students, and contributed to helping hundreds of families exit homelessness. One custodian, one homeless student, one morning in a school bathroom, 20 years of ripples spreading outward, touching lives, changing systems, protecting vulnerable people. That was Michael Stevens' legacy. That was Emma Carter's origin story. That was the power of noticing someone in need and choosing to help rather than looking away. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything.
Thank you very much for listening. Please let us know what you think of this story in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any other videos.